Well, I hate my fucking job. Well, I hate my fucking job. Oh, oh, oh. You know I hate my fucking job. Well, I hate my fucking job. Oh, oh, oh.
Hey there, all you ninnies, twits, dingbats, and social reprobates. This is Reverend Norm welcoming you to another electrifying, stimulating, and totally off-the-wall sensational episode of Killed by Desk, the only show that answers the question that no one's asking: what does misfit musicians, weirdo artists, and oddball scenester mainstays do to make a living? Prepare to have your minds completely and totally blown by the details you never thought you'd want to know. The ups, the downs, the conference calls gone wrong, the coworker questions, the dress codes, and what they've learned and what they wish they hadn't, and if they're at all happy where they are and what they've become. From selling out to doubling down, let's talk punk rock business and what happens when the two get all mixed up. Here's your host, Bill Florio.
Hey, this is Bill Florio.
Yo, this is MC Charlie Boswell.
Hey everyone, it's Dave Harrison.
Today's guest on Killed by Desk is James Spooner. James Spooner is known for Afropunk, both the documentary and the music festival. He's a tattoo artist now, which is pretty cool.
Vegan tattoos.
He's working on those comic books. I know he's been posting a lot to Instagram. Some of that stuff's really cool as well.
Yes, I know James when he was kind of like an arty kid living in the West Village. I was friends with a lot of his friends. They're a few years younger than me, and it was a really nice human being. I connected with him a few times over the years, see how he was doing. Really proud of his accomplishments, and I think we just had like a good, earnest conversation with him about, just like where your career could go when you're trying to do things that are creative. I think it's just tough.
I would say this was definitely one of our deeper conversations. I mean, not everything has to be super silly, and this was really one where I think a lot of his answers made us think a lot. I think that his forthrightness was really impressive to me. The ability to look at what he's done, and I think even James, if you're listening, I think you're a little too hard on yourself. I think you've built a really amazing career in a lot of areas, and I personally was really impressed with what he had to say and what he's gone through.
Yeah, and I like James because he's not really a band guy. He did like zines and he did a record label. He put out a lot of like emo-ish bands.
Don't forget the heckling.
Well, no, he just was a fan of my heckling. He didn't. He's too nice to heckle people. But yeah, let's listen to James. Let's go. Roll the tape. All right, James, could you just introduce yourself like you're introducing yourself to someone you just met?
Hi, I'm James Spooner. I'm a tattoo artist and illustrator and filmmaker, comic book artist. I do a bunch of junk.
Cool. I knew you when you were a teenager, and as far as I understand, you got into punk at such an early age. It's been described that you were kind of raised by the punk scene, and here's what a friend of yours said, basically. I'm paraphrasing. James got into the punk at such an early age. It seems like the punk scene raised him and instilled values he feels he must always adhere to. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I got into it too much earlier than most people, like 13, 12, whatever. But I definitely bought into it. And once, I think it was probably around when we met, when I was like 15 or 16, that I first really became entrenched in like the DIY culture. And that's what really like hooked me and what I really bought into. And I think that I've used all the things that I learned in the punk scene throughout my life in all of my like public ventures, businesses, or like ways of existing in the world.
Cool. So like I just said, like your businesses or whatever, you mentioned you're a cartoonist and a tattoo artist. Could you just walk us through like a little bit of what you consider your professional career?
Sure. I think that like it all started when I was like 16 or 17, and I had a zine and a record label and a distribution zine table, like that whole kind of, I was the guy with the record box at every show. And then around like 19 and 20, I started getting really serious about fine arts, and I was doing sculpture and trying to like make it for whatever that means in like the fine arts world. But I quickly understood like how that world works, and that it's probably not something that's going to be like the best way for me to, put my messages out there. Around when I was 25, I released Afropunk. So I worked on it for a couple years. And that's when 25 is when I was officially like a filmmaker, screening my movie and whatnot. And subsequently, Well, I guess I should say before that, I started DJing and throwing parties and stuff like that. So the DJing and like promotion and all the stuff that I learned through both the punk scene and the New York nightlife world, I translated into like promoting my film and starting doing like Afropunk shows. And then that, exploded into festivals and all this stuff. I bowed out after like the fourth festival and moved to Los Angeles to try to continue a film career. And like, again, I kind of like learned like Hollywood and the mainstream stuff wasn't really for me. And I kind of fell into tattooing, and I have been a tattooer for 11 years. But in the last like 3 or 4 years, I've been working on I've been cartooning and working on comics, and I'm aiming to release my first full-length graphic novel in the next, it should be done within a year. So when it's released, I don't know.
So you're writing and illustrating that graphic novel? And what's the subject matter? Again,
it's about my first year in the punk scene. So it's kind of like learning. A lot of times when we get into punk, we're attracted to like the anger, aggressive, kind of nihilistic nature of like things. But once I learned about like DIY and the politics and all the things that are also connected to the punk scene, that's what really gripped me. So that's what I am doing. Or like the comic is really kind of that trajectory of learning what punk rock is really all about.
So you were attracted to the nihilism. Were you part of that Burrowism movement?
I don't know what that is, so I would say no.
You want me to? That's like when people just used to stand there and scream Brooklyn.
It was cool when you screamed Brooklyn or Bronx, but when you said this Queens, it kind of never really worked.
No, I got into the punk scene in Southern California in the desert in like a very small, very white power, racist hardcore scene or punk rock scene. And I moved to New York 2 years later. So the comic all takes place in the desert with the exception of this one Christmas vacation where I was visiting my father. And that's where I like met real hardcore kids who like introduced me to things like ABC No Rio. And
you mentioned before that you met Bill when you were 16, and now you're saying you met real hardcore kids. So I'm guessing that you didn't meet Bill at that time.
I'm not counting him.
Hold on a second. So wait, you say it's a white power scene. Was it the kind of thing where you were afraid of them, or you were part of that scene, or are you just saying like it was an oppressive type of scene that you had to like skitter around?
Yeah, it was the very first punk that I met was also black. So I had this introduction as if like I'm supposed to be there. But then what I realized is that like we were the outliers, but because we're all like 13 and these kids are like, even if they're claiming to be white power, like they don't really know what they're about. So they're like, we're white power, but you guys are okay,
Right.
Then,
that's what I thought. Yeah.
Then when we get around the older kids who actually know what they're talking about, they're like, yeah, but why are you hanging out with these two niggers? So it was a weird thing where like my best friend or one of my good friends is Mexican, and his best friend, since he was like 3 years old, was like full like Aryan Nation white power kid, So then he met me and he was like, thought I was really cool, and then we all got along. But like there was always this question of like, are they just being nice to me because they're gonna like take me somewhere and kill me? Or like it's like that kind of, there's always whispers of like they're gonna jump you for your boots and that kind of stuff,
Yeah, I feel like when you got into New York, you definitely gravitated to quite the opposite of that. Does that sound right?
When I moved to New York, all of a sudden there are brown kids everywhere. So one of my first kind of closest friends was Ryan Bland, who at the time was in a band called Bushman. Now he's in this band called Ache. And he's like a hardcore guy. And he's black, and his band was all black at that time. And then, and there are always, you're from New York, there's just always brown people of various races all over. So it became less of an issue. And then it became more of an issue as I left New York to like like there was I think once I found like Reconstruction Records and started like wanting something other than the like New York tough guy thing, I found like the suburban hardcore, which spoke more to me politically and whatever, but that was a lot more white. So while those kids weren't racist in a outwardly way, I definitely felt othered, you know, in this like, you guys are rich suburban kids and I'm from New York.
Yeah, no, I mean, I remember we both attended the Columbus More Than Music Festival, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I actually went there because I thought there was going to be a bunch of straight edge bands to make fun of, and I guess that was the year before. So, you know, it just was a lot of that kind of like San Diego, screamo type of stuff. I mean, do you think you gravitated toward that music because of the message or because of the actual music or just because of the people? Because that's what I find interesting about you.
The thing that I resonate with is that kind of like where Riot Girl meets straight edge meets like Krusty Kids DIY thing. And it certainly was the music, but it was also the people, because like when I was more of a New York hardcore guy, like I liked those like shitty Rec Age bands that, you know, were playing at the time. But once I heard that stuff from San Diego that were or like that Ebullition, Gravity Records stuff, or even like Gern Blanstein stuff, like that stuff really moved me. And what they were saying was definitely resonating more than just the standard kind of like, you stab me in the back, brotherhood type stuff.
Got it. So this is all Brendan from SFA's fault.
Like we've said over messages, like punk rock generations go in 5 years. So like I've never met that dude. You know, he's a generation older than me. You know what I'm saying?
You never went to CBGB's?
I did, but I got there after the heyday. So
yeah, but he was sitting at the door. He was a fixture right there.
Yeah. No, you're right.
Him and Jimmy G were like the two guys at the door. By the way, hi James, I'm Dave. I joined late, but whenever I went, it was always Jimmy and Brendan at the door.
No, you're right. And when you say that, I'm like, okay, I know exactly who you're talking about.
Did you ever buy any videotapes from him?
I didn't. So you guys are like New York guys, like
I'm a New York guy. Bill's from Yonkers.
And I'm technically from Long Island.
Dave's from Long Island, so I can just Dave.
Queens!
Yeah, quote unquote, you know.
It doesn't work.
But yeah, like I got there in time for like last Gorilla Biscuits show. You know, I got there in time for like Burn and those bands. But
did you see Minus swinging that plastic rubber hammer in the pit?
I think you missed that.
You missed that.
I remember seeing like Marauder and like scared of those guys. Like all that stuff was like big dudes who like had tattoos and didn't wear shirts and like really seemed like they were trying to beat people up. And
totally the opposite of ABC No Rio a few months after that.
Yeah, and that's I think what was attractive about ABC and about like the suburban shows was what like I didn't fear for my life.
What about walking to ABC No Rio? Not now. Now it's like there's $1,000 sneakers next door, and you can't even. There's like $2 million condos down the street.
Of course. I volunteered there in 94 and I lived there in 95. And I definitely remember getting offered heroin in like 16 different ways just between like Houston and Rivington. Body bag, tray bag, like, you know, all of these things. It's just like, wow, you guys are really doing a drug called body bag.
The first show we played at ABC, and this is before the matinees because we were first. We played down there a night show, and my current wife, but she wasn't my wife at the time, came with her friend, and they took a cab from Queens, and the cab driver wouldn't let them out. And she's like, no, this is it. And he pulled the car on the sidewalk, and he says, well, you get out and leave your friend here, and get your boyfriend and bring him upstairs to prove that this is the right place. So that's how bad it was back then.
Yeah, I believe it.
So James, how old were you when you moved to New York?
14.
14? Okay, so you went to high school in New York, and then what happened from there?
Well, what high school did you go to?
I went to LaGuardia High School.
Oh, wow.
Artsy. I'm an artsy kid.
You had to take an audition to get in then, right?
Yeah, we had to audition.
So I want to jump to tattooing, right? So was tattooing a natural progression? Like, how did you land there, right? You obviously had some art training, you know, this kind of thing. Why did you pick tattooing?
Well, I was working like as a producer on this like internet show in 2008, and then the economy collapsed and they like canned everybody. So I was on unemployment, and at the time I was like really into like riding bikes and stuff. And I met another black guy at a bike co-op. shop, and we became friends. He had heard of me through Afropunk, and it turned out that he was a tattooer. And I kind of naively asked him if he would teach me, and he said, yeah. So he gave me like a really shoddy apprenticeship, but it was really just the okay that I needed. You know, it was just like he opened the door and I just went for it. And I worked at a bunch of like really shitty shops for a while until I could get up a clientele. And it was really, you know, a year in, I figured out, it was the first time I heard about vegan tattooing. And I realized that like all the products I was using were not vegan. And I've been vegan since I was 16. So I was like, oh, why am I not offering this as a service? And then it turned out that I was the first person in all of California to do vegan tattoos. So I had this insane clientele like overnight, which got me good a lot faster.
So you were new to tattooing, but you weren't new to art, right? You had a visual arts background before that, correct?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of tattooing is unlearning the fine art stuff because it's more of a illustration background that you need than a like, you know, when I was in art school, it was all about like value drawing and note you're not allowed to use any lines and all this stuff. So I had to like unlearn that stuff. It came in handy like years later when I was ready to do portraits and stuff like that. But your standard tattoo is like line work, filling, coloring. I had to learn stuff. Plus I hadn't really drawn anything in almost a decade because I'd been doing film work.
And let's touch upon that a little bit. So I saw something, I think it was on your Instagram, where you were talking about, I think you shared some early footage that you had shot and you said, you know, just to prepare for Afropunk. So you had the idea for the documentary before you knew how to make a film, correct? How did that come about? And did you learn solely to get this message out that you felt was super important?
Yeah, 100%. It's the same like punk rock attitude of like, I don't know how to play an instrument, but I want to be in a band. It was the same thing. So I didn't go to film school or anything, but I knew that I wanted to make this documentary and that I wanted to tell this story and that film was going to be the best way for me to tell the story. So started renting documentaries. Actually, Bill, did you work at that video store in Williamsburg?
No, but I know the people that work there.
Jacuzzi Joe's store?
Jacuzzi Joe's store, yeah.
Okay. It was like all reconstruction people in there.
Yeah, I had a little bit better job at that point.
But they didn't get the same lunch they got at Recon. 2 slices,
right.
garlic nuts, and a Coke.
That's right, $3.
So I lived down the street from that video store and I was friends with somebody. They had on their computer like not to charge me. So like every day I would just go and rent a documentary and watch it so that I would like learn what I liked and didn't like. And I was kind of like learning on the job.
How did you land that not to charge me card?
I don't know. I mean, it's just that like, I think it was because it was all reconstruction kids and they were like, oh, I remember Razzle from back in the day.
I would give you a free card for sure.
Yeah. So it was like, I'm trying to remember who was there. I thought it would have been you, but it was like Simone, maybe Freedom, maybe. I don't know. I can't remember.
So the whole time you were doing this research, did you tell people what you wanted to do, or was it more of a secret? Like, I'm going to get to the point where I feel like I'm ready to make this and then I'm going to reveal it. How did that come about?
I'm sure I was like talking about it. Like, I mean, it was really, if you remember like 2001, things were really, there wasn't a lot of internet. There wasn't Facebook or any of that, MySpace, any of that. So I had to get an email address, you know, like I had to buy a computer. Everything was like brand new. I started with like Final Cut 1. So everything was just like, here's some new technology. Let me try to figure out how to make it work. So I was like on like punkplanet.com, like, hey, do you guys know any black people? Like, you know, trying to like find, you know, because I figure there's a black kid in every scene. So somebody's going to be like, oh yeah, Black Chuck, I know him. Like, you should talk to him, you know?
Oh, Jesus. It is always like, yeah, it's like, oh, Black Danny, or that's so fucked up.
Yeah. So I had to go find Black Danny and Black Chuck and interview them, basically.
You know what's even worse? When they did a book about black rock, they featured Bug Out Society.
That's right.
Why'd they do that?
Why?
I can read it for you.
Okay.
It's called Rip It Up. I bought it for 50 cents because it has this paragraph, but it's called Rip It Up, The Black Experience in Rock and Roll.
By Candia Crazy Horse.
Yes. So do you own it?
I don't, but they gave me the opportunity to do the book, but I just didn't have the time or energy. So I knew Candia kind of. I was like, she's a black journalist, like rock journalist. Maybe she'll want to do it, you know?
Well, I wish you had written it, because this is what we got out of it.
Okay.
Not that we should be in this book at all, but it said, even though it was the Public Enemy era, I decided that pro-blackness shouldn't stop me from flexing my head with the whiteys. I finally broke down and went with Chaka to a hardcore show at this place on the Lower East Side called the Lismar Lounge. Bug Out Society played. They did a song called Lees and Pumas, and they were throwing White Castle hamburgers at the 60 of us who watched in the dark. Lismar was a dirty fucking basement that you entered via those steel trapdoors that led to the street level. People are starving, and these white boys are throwing hamburgers. I didn't get it. We are part of Black history here.
Okay, listen.
I think that's great. What are you talking about?
Yeah, I'm going to say that probably was an accurate depiction of what happened. Because I was telling my girlfriend Lisa about you, Bill, and the story that I have that like will go down in like hardcore infamy for me is the More Guitars prank on Earth Crisis. Do you remember this?
Yes, I was thinking about it this morning. You could explain it. I could tell you how my little part in it with you.
So what I remember is that it was like the New Bedford Fest or one of those like Massachusetts straight edge New Year's Eve festival, and Earth Crisis was headlining, and they had like a balcony above the stage. And for some reason, I don't know if you let me in on this or whatever, but I knew that you had like prepared 20 blow up guitars like that you would have in a swimming pool or something. And then Earth Crisis plays a song and you are yelling over the stage, more guitar, more guitar. And then they're like, oh, I guess we need more guitar. Like in the mic, they're telling the sound man more guitar. And then they go to play their second song. And then you just threw all those guitars over the balcony. And then all the kids in the crowd have these guitars and they're like hitting each other with them, making the Earth Crisis tough guy fans who want to like mosh really upset because everyone is just having a good time and they want to mosh, you know?
This morning I was taking a walk and I thought about that moment, and the one vivid memory I have is you. I mean, you were a little bit taller than everybody. You were totally rocking out with the guitar in the middle of all these people with different expressions, and it just made it all worth it.
Probably in the biggest pants in the room.
Yeah, we shared a moment there. I really appreciate your part in that, even if it was just like making a funny face.
I thought it was the most hilarious because I was straight edge, but I was never, and I was vegan, but I was never like an Earth Crisis guy. So there were those moments where, like, remember when writing things on your arms or whatever was like a hardcore thing? I like jumped up. I was in Syracuse and I wrote "Fuck Your Vegan Power" on my arms and like went up on stage when Earth Crisis was playing, and like
I feel like I formed a small movement there of copycats.
I remember when writing on your head was a skinhead thing.
If any band deserved that, though, it would be Earth Crisis. I had a friend on Long Island who let them stay with them, stay at his parents' house after they played the PWAC, I think. And the mom was like a super traditional suburban mom, so she cooked breakfast for the band and she made bacon and eggs. Oh, yeah. And they were so angry. They like threw the bread. They're like, "We don't eat this shit," blah, and they were so angry about it. And the mom started crying. She was like, I just tried to be nice for these boys on tour. It just became a horrible thing.
Go back to Afropunk, though. What was your end goal of making the film besides getting your message out? Did you ever think you'd make some money on it? Did you have a plan to do that tour? Once you've got it done, where were you going to go with it? Did you have like a thought or vision?
Honestly, I felt like I would screen it in New York twice and in LA once, and that would be the end of it, and I'd move on with my life. It was not until I went, the second screening was at the American Black Film Festival, and at that time it was in Miami, and there was 3 consecutive screenings, and all of them were sold out, and it was like super mainstream Black folk, and I was just like, and then people were telling me like, oh, like I relate to this. I was like the only Black person at my banking job, or I'm the only, whatever it is. They related in their own way, and it made me realize that like I wasn't just making this like this critique of punk rock, but it was a metaphor for something much larger that I didn't have an understanding of at the time. So once I got that, I was like, holy shit, like there are people who are going to be interested in this beyond people in the punk scene. And that turned out to be the case, that like every time I would do a screening, especially in like a big city and certainly in New York, it would just be like 100 randos would come, and I did like a screening at Pianos like really early on, like maybe like the 5th or 6th show. And like a friend of mine worked there, so he just gave me the door. He's like, You can just have the space for an hour and a half or whatever it's going to take, and you can have the door. And like 100 people came, and I was charging $7. So I like made rent in one day. I was like, holy shit, like this is like actually something that I can like do. And then once it occurred to me that like I should start doing shows, like putting on bands and play the film before, it just kind of turned into like a scene, and all of a sudden kids were calling themselves Afropunks, and that was really weird and not my intention. But it kind of just started taking on a life of its own, which I just helped perpetuate.
Were you working a day job at that point when you put out the film?
No, I was a DJ and party promoter. So I've like only had a day job once. It was like first 4 months.
What was that?
That's when I was doing that production job, and then the economy tanked and I started tattooing. So
I ran into you at the airport, I don't know, in like 2010. I didn't recognize you, and you were like Mr. Slick. I was like, wow, that guy he's really slicking it out. Like, what point were you at that point? You were at the airport, so you were flying somewhere.
2010. I don't remember that, so that's how cool I am.
I mean, you had to be like, hey, it's Razzle. And I'm like, oh, Razzle.
Yeah. I mean, if I came up to you, that just shows you that I was humble enough to be like, hey, you're fucking Bill Florio.
So you got worse after that?
I don't know. I mean, I feel like maybe it was just an awkward interaction because I don't remember. Like, I don't think that there are very many moments where I've been like I really thought I was the shit. And in 2010, I was like 2 years into tattooing. So I was like super humble because my shit sucked. I was like being like berated by my people I worked with like on a daily basis about how much I suck. So I don't think.
What about the people you tattooed? They have to live with it forever.
Yeah, well, luckily people have a really low standard of like.
Yeah, I seen that. And, I realized that when we were playing a show at CBGB's and Mike Bullshit came in with that B is for bullshit tattoo.
How much do you think he paid for that?
Back then, $25.
I bet he paid less than you paid for that book you bought.
Let's go into that a little bit. So, it sounds like you had trouble working with others. You have customers, right? You have customers today, and you have this vegan tattooing, bringing them in. And, is it true that people want a vegan tattooer as much as they want vegan tattoos? You're going to have to sit with them for hours, right?
No. I mean, at a certain point, I opened a shop and I had like 3 or 4 people working with me, none of whom were vegan, but we all provided that service. And there were like a handful of people who like, if it was like the choice between their tattooer not being vegan or being vegan, like I'm sure they would prefer them to be vegan because they know that the money they're giving them is not going to buy ribs later. But
I always get chicken and ribs, and then I know 2 animals were killed.
The most bang for your buck, I understand. So, yes, they're happy to invest in their chosen community, but at the same time, they also want a tattoo that like I had a partner who specialized in like watercolor, like style stuff that I just do not do. So if that's what they want, then he's the right guy to go to.
But do people come to you because of who you are and what you've done with your film work? I mean, I feel like with someone like Civ, I think a good chunk of people go to him for tattoos because
he's Civ.
He's Civ, exactly. So like, do you run into the same thing? Have you had people come to you that are like, I'm not vegan, I actually don't give a shit about that, but I loved Afropunk?
I would say that my clientele fits into 2 categories. Either they're vegan or they're black. And sometimes they're black and vegan. But the black folks, it's typically word of mouth from either early on in my career, it was through Afropunk, yes. And later, I also have been very vocal about the importance of knowing how to tattoo darker skin tones. So if you do like a Google search for like tattooing dark skin tones, there's very little out there, and I'm like at the top of that list. So I get a lot of black clients who are just looking for higher quality tattoos.
Is that like an opportunity for like a multi-million-dollar business? Because in the beauty product industry, wasn't that like a huge success story?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely, I charge market value, market rate, and black folks from all like walks of life come to me specifically for this service, and some come from out of state or whatever. So there's certainly, for some kind of person who was more of a marketing exploitive kind of whatever, like I've always been like, I just need to do enough to get by so that I can like make the art.
Well, I'm kind of thinking about what you're talking about. You're giving this information for free on the internet about, doing the dark tones. But I mean, there must be some knowledge there that can be packaged, like, with the beauty product and so forth. They sell the commodity. Is there some way to, use that knowledge to sell the inks to tattooers so they know they have the product available and the knowledge to how to use it?
I use the same ink on everybody. So it's not that. It's about knowing, like, there's like trial and error. Basically, if there are a lot of tattooers who are fantastic tattooers who do shitty tattoos on black folks because they don't know what colors to use and not use. They don't know like how to design it in such a way that like in 5 years the whole thing won't close up and look like a blob.
But yeah, so you know what colors work. I mean, half the stuff you buy is just about how they package it and market it. So you take the colors, you sell those colors as a package with the instructions and the know-how on how to use it. And there's the play, I think.
Yeah, that's a different person. I don't give a fuck.
But we're supposed to be some kind of business podcast, I'm told. So that's what I'm going to.
I mean, really, no, hold on. I mean, here's the thing. So you have your customers coming in. You have special things that they're attracted to about your tattoos. But would you take that further? Would you give training? Would you sell training to other tattoo artists? Would you give seminars? Would you have your face on the ink and get a cut of that? Like,
I don't have those kind of aspirations.
Do you have anything against it?
Well, I mean, tattooing is weird in that, like, if there was somebody in the industry who was like a fantastic tattooer who also worked with dark skin tones and they wanted to market ink in that, it's fine. That's totally fine. I've always been somebody who, like, I have my eyes on a prize, and the prize is typically does not relate back to how much money I'm making. So, when it comes to, like, right now, I'm really focused on getting this graphic novel done, and the amount of work that's involved, I won't even make close to minimum wage, but it's just what I want to do.
I'm going to stop the conversation for 1 second and tell you, if you enjoyed this conversation, there's tons more where this came from. For only $5 a month, you can get full episodes with each of our guests for a total of 5 episodes per month. Want to help out with some gas money to get us to the next show? We have merch and more at killedbydesk.com. Now let's get back to the show.
I mean, there's creative energy going towards tattooing and going towards your other work. Do you feel like the tattooing saps some of that energy and you're getting paid for it?
I did go through like a tattooing slump where I kind of hit a plateau and I was just phoning it in. Like, I was doing good tattoos. Everyone was happy with them, but I wasn't like progressing and inspired. That changed a few months before the pandemic started. And then I was excited again, but it's all art. The reason that I'm able to do comics now is because of the illustration stuff that I learned from tattooing. And so I try to like see it all as a learning experience. But the other piece of it is that like tattooing is an art form that people actually pay for. So it's like being a musician. You might not make money in your punk band, but you can write like jingles for commercials on the side, and then you can keep being in your punk band.
So with the graphic novel, I mean, you say you learned about the illustration from the tattooing. So you think that the art you're going to put in is going to have like a tattoo feel? Like, will this be like a tattoo feel comic, the way there's like tattoo inspired fashion and so forth?
Well, I think that it doesn't, like, the comic doesn't look like a like American traditional or anything like that, but it's just the thing of like, it has the same template of like strong outlines, a certain kind of shading. It's not in color, so there's none of that. But basically, before I started tattooing, I never was like cartooning. That was the way that I learned, Can
you tell us some tattoo horror stories and like just how you dealt with them? Like let's say like a cover up or just an unrealistic tattoo. Like, I want fireworks on my arm.
Yeah. I mean, I've had things where I can give like a few kind of examples. Like, most people come with ideas that are not very well fleshed out. Most of the time, they're willing to be guided to have something that's like solid. I remember having a guy come in who was like a red-haired kind of like very pale white dude. And he was like, I want an all color tattoo. Like, I don't want any black outline. And the reason reason that like tattoos look the way they look is because of the black. So there's a whole like boring, I can tell you all the boring reasons why, but ultimately I had to say no. And he was just like, no, well, I'm too white for black ink. I was just like, wow.
You just said no, you didn't try to refer him to someone else, or?
Well, I explained it to him and explained how like black ink holds the color in and that like it'll age before its time and you'll look like you have a 20-year-old tattoo in 4 years, all of these things. And he's like showing me other tattoos he's had that don't have black ink. And I'm looking at them and I'm like, yeah, those suck. But he's saying like, no, but look, they did it and whatever. And then,
wait, did you tell him that his tattoos suck?
well, not in those words, Now I have examples of tattoos that I fixed by simply putting black into them. And I can say like, well, look at this tattoo and then look at how this looks when you add black to it. It's infinitely better,
I heard about this horror story once about this kid that cut Murphy's Law into his arm with a knife and then rubbed dirt in it.
Oh, that sounds terrible.
That sounds like an infection. It doesn't sound like a tattoo.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like a tattoo at all. I've had people who have had like allergic reactions and that really sucks. It's part of the thing. It's like you're injecting a foreign substance into your body. It's not always going to work out,
Is the allergic reaction, is that anything to do with the vegan elements of the material you're using? The ink, or is that not?
Oh, the reactions are always to red and red derivatives because there's a heavy metal, cadmium, that's in red. So it happens very rarely, but it does happen. And there's no way of knowing that it's going to happen. And most of the time, it just takes longer to heal and it's fine. But, I had a client who like her arm like swole up crazy and she had to go to a dermatologist and all, steroid patches and all this shit. And then he came back like a year later and, we touched it up with a different color and it was fine. So it's not like the horror stories are usually due to like people being assholes and just wanting things that are like unreasonable. And
why is it always the red dye that's a problem? You remember when in the 70s they had to ban the red M&Ms because like red dye number 5 caused cancer or something?
Probably the same dye.
Yeah, I mean in the case of the ink, it's definitely because of cadmium, which is just it's just a metal. It's not good for you, I guess.
Before you made it, you kind of said when you first started you had opened up your own shop. Is that not true anymore? And like, how did that work out?
Well, like I think in like my 4th or 5th year, I realized that I was like the money that I was giving to the shop in commission was paying their rent, but they were still treating me like I was a total dick. So I realized that I could just give myself like a 40% raise by opening my own space. So I did that. And then that was just a private studio that expanded over the course of a few years into like a storefront with various other tattooers and stuff. And then when my lease ran out, my landlord wanted to take over the space for something else. So I just opened another private studio because ultimately I'm not a good boss. I don't want to deal with people and their drama and whatever. So I'd rather...
For tattoos, though, it's more like you're a landlord, right? You're renting the chair.
No, that's how barbering works. But in tattooing, it's commission based. So the shop gets a percentage usually. If it's an established tattooer, it'll be 30%. If it's a newbie, it'll be like 50%. So that's why tattoos are so expensive usually, because half the money or a third of the money is going to the shop.
Gotcha. Whoever's running that shop has to take on all of the bullshit.
Yeah, because tattooing really, the industry attracts a lot of problematic people. So,
What's funny, you mentioned earlier that I'm paraphrasing, but you said something about not having a real job, but it sounds like running a tattoo parlor would be a real job. But then you also said something about how you're not a good boss. So is there something in there about how you feel uncomfortable being a boss? Are you uncomfortable running a business?
Yeah, I don't want to tell people what to do. Like, I've got kids, I'll tell them what to do. But I don't want to come to the shop and then be like, why didn't you guys clean up this part? Or like, were you guys drinking in here after I left? I just don't want to deal with all that shit. And I'm dealing with grown men and women. I expect them to be able to like handle themselves,
Maybe you should open up a vegan straight edge tattoo parlor.
That would help with the drinking. But straight edge kids, they'll be playing like Foursquare in the after hours.
So do you feel like that's something that came from punk rock where you don't want to boss people around? Or do you feel like that's something that feeling and how you react to that is what drew you to punk rock is the same thing that makes you not want to be a boss?
I'm not sure because, I was never able to be in a band either. I just don't think I like work well with others. When I look at all my like business relationships, they've all kind of like fallen apart in negative ways. And I can recognize that I'm the common denominator, you know, like maybe I pick sociopaths to work with, or maybe I'm just hard to work with myself. I don't know.
So when you know, basically you started, like, Afropunk blew up, and it sounds like you looked into actually working in the film industry, right? You have to work with people there. Was that a big part of it not working out for you, or is there other things as well?
No, I always got along with, like, you know, like when I shot my second film, White Lies, like that was like probably a 20-person crew. And for the most part, we got along. It wasn't like there was a lot of camaraderie. But the problem with the industry was that I'm like pushing a different agenda than Hollywood is. So if I'm in there and I'm pitching like stories of the underground or whatever, it takes a particular kind of person to hear that. And this was also pre-streaming, so there were only the networks and HBO or something, you know, so there wasn't as many opportunities. Now, like, I think that people want to hear stories from like different backgrounds. There's a big push for like, you know, quote unquote own stories. I have a friend who wrote a book called Black Card about a white passing biracial kid in the hardcore scene who has a imaginary black friend who takes his black card from him. And that got optioned into it to be made into a TV show. So it's like there's clearly we're in a different time than we were at that time for me, you know?
Do you feel like if White Lies, Black Sheep came out now, it would be looked at differently?
Maybe, but, you know, if I'm honest with myself, I really don't like that film. So I don't think I was ready to make a movie like that. I think I just had the opportunity to make the movie.
Did you feel like there were stories left untold in the truth of what came out in Afropunk that you tried to kind of fictionalize a narrative that was a hybrid of your own experiences with what you hoped some of the people in the film would have, of the documentary would have said? How did that come about? Like, what was your thinking in regards to that?
It was a weird thing. Like, I was nominated for this Rockefeller grant and I won it. So all of a sudden I just had like tens of thousands of dollars to make a movie. And I had like this shoddy script that I was working on. And it was kind of like in the spirit of like Wild Style is to Beat Street or something like that, you know, where I'm like, well, I have this story. And interestingly, decades later, I'm still telling that story, but I'm just more sophisticated of a storyteller. You know, I just don't think I was ready at that time.
I was actually going to tie that to, you know, you made an Instagram post about a month ago about Black Lives Matter and your conflict with that and all of that. And it feels like you're still, not that you're going to change as a human being and who you are. Do you still feel like there's stories to tell in regards to your experience and how you can communicate that? And then kind of the second part of that question would be, did you feel pigeonholed after Afropunk, and did you resent having to be, you know, represent something to so many people that maybe you didn't necessarily want to represent, or maybe you did?
Yes. Okay. So first I want to clarify that, you know, just the way your question is asked, it sounds like I might have a problem with Black Lives Matter, and I 100% don't. Yeah.
Did not mean that at all. I apologize if that's how that came across.
Yeah, I just don't want the listener to think that. There was definitely a time where I felt like I'm the black punk go-to guy, and I have to be that, and that's the only thing I'm allowed to be. So I read an interview that I did from back then that was like, my next film will definitely not be about, you know, the only one or whatever. And I think for a long time I had resentment around, I didn't want to be the guy who's still talking about the 7-inch that I put out in high school, you know? I want to be known for more than that. But I think at a certain point, I realized that, like, if I'm going to tell a story about my life, even if I'm telling a story about, like, being a father, I have to include my experience as a punk rocker, because that is who I am. And with that comes all the trappings of being a black punk. So I became more comfortable with the fact that, like, that is part of my identity, and and I'm happy to talk about those experiences, because I know that other people are having those experiences and they need somebody who's gone through it to maybe get their viewpoint.
And on the other hand, though, I mean, did you feel like you walked out of opportunities that, like, the average film student would have killed for?
Yeah, I mean, you know, when I had that little production job I was talking about, it was interesting because all my bosses, so I had this job. I was a production assistant. I was sitting at lunch with all the producers who were my bosses, and they were talking about like their short film that they're working on that they hope to get into Toronto Film Festival in the next season or whatever, And I'm like, I've had 2 features in Toronto. Who am I aspiring to here? So I realized that like, if I want to move further in this industry, at the time, I felt like if I was going to become like a mainstream Hollywood director, I was going to either have to jump through hoops that I wasn't willing to do, or I was going to have to like make projects that I wasn't into. I just didn't have a lot of confidence that I could still maintain my voice in that atmosphere. Today, it feels different. Today I feel like if given an opportunity, there is mainstream money that will back a voice like mine.
Yeah. So you weren't willing to make Alien 3 to get to Fight Club.
Yeah, exactly.
I do have to say on the topic of, I know I keep going back to your Instagram, but I love your quarantine videos. Is that something that just came about as like a fun thing to do because you're stir crazy? Or was that something that, you had planned, or how did that come about? And how do you fit that? Is that something you consider art, or is that just having fun and goofing off with your family?
That's all my girlfriend. She's just a dork. She's like so fun loving and always wants to like do silly stuff like that. So, she's the one who came up with like, let's get all these punk songs and like make videos about like what it's like in quarantine or whatever. And my daughter is at the age where she still like wants to hang out and she still thinks that we're fun. So we're like, taking advantage of that. I can't take any credit for that other than like helping picking out songs.
So it's not 1997 anymore. You're planning on publishing. Are you apprehensive about that process since you've been through this other media experience?
Yeah, I mean, I'm totally worried about, I already had like a failed agent relationship. I'm now querying new agents, and I've already had notes that like are reminiscent of the notes that I got when I was making Afropunk that were like basically like, who would be interested in this other than other Black punks? Like, what I still like have that note resonate with me because like I wish that I could remember who that person was so I could show them how wrong they were, But I think that's part of like having a unique voice or pushing an underground message or a non-mainstream message is that you have to find somebody who gets it and is also willing to take a chance.
Do you fear not finding them? And
no, because if like worst case scenario, like I can always self-publish, like I can still reach like a lot of people. And there's always the question of like, do you sign to a major or do you stay indie? Like that question exists in publishing as much as it does in music or whatever. So
let's say you get this out. What happens after that? What other ideas you have? Like what kind of legacy do you want to leave? I mean, you've already left a lot with Afropunk.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I definitely have more stories, and I have a really complicated father and childhood, and I have not been able to grapple with how to like tell that story yet. But I think that ultimately, at least right now, my focus has been on exposing people who are on the fringe of the underground to what the underground is and giving them an opportunity to embrace it the way that we did when we were kids, as opposed to the like fake activism and posturing that comes from the mainstream that's posing as underground. Do you know what I'm saying? So the book kind of does that. And I've got some other projects that I can't really talk about right now that are really focused on like grabbing the attention of people who want to make change, but are still thinking that there's a way to straddle the line between mainstream and underground, or are just mainstream and think that like they can make change that way. Like,
I mean, is that something that you've grappled with all along? Like the kind of the person that comes up thinking that they're going to be part of the mainstream and still remain cool? Is there a conflict of selling out always in your mind?
Yeah, I mean, I think that like, we come from this generation where like being a sellout or a poser is like the worst thing you can be called. And now we're in a generation where people aspire to sell out. And I want to I want to flip that, because I think that there is real value in what we had as kids and what I know it still exists. And while I've never been like, you have to listen to punk rock in order to like achieve that, I do firmly believe that like there is no such thing as the alt mainstream. Do you know what I'm saying?
Do you feel like the mainstream's starting to take on some of those qualities? I was having a conversation with a couple old punk friends of mine, and they're like, it's funny to be in conversations with like your aunt or uncle about things that you only talked about with your friends on a punk level.
Oh yeah, 100%. It's like you go on, you'll see some house mom on Instagram who has ACAB on her. Like, we're currently in a place where 2 months ago you couldn't have a serious conversation about defunding the police with anybody other than somebody who was also very left. But here's my thought is that the mainstream and the underground, they work together and they need each other. The mainstream is always looking to the underground, figure out like what's cool, how to be. We were talking about intersectionality long before that word was something that I ever even heard of, just through like booking at ABC No Rio or something, right? So now that's part of the like mainstream vernacular, and they will always take from us, and we will always be reinventing or pushing things further. We'll always be reacting to them. And one wouldn't exist without the other. Like, what would punk rock be if we didn't have something to flip off?
Like the Bangles.
I think you nailed it. Exactly.
Thank you.
So when you look at it, do you ever have that fuck it moment where like, you could probably make a great living being an influencer, and just like curating your social media and getting brands to pay? Have you ever had a weak moment where you're like, fuck it, I'm just going to do that and just live off of corporate money?
I think probably the closest that anything like that was even an opportunity was just before I left Afropunk, like the year prior to me leaving. It was like I was blogging for Toyota. I like I did an ad for some stupid watch that like was like, some $300 like limited edition Afropunk watch. I mean, it's just these garbage like things that like opportunities that are presented, but I didn't last long. It was like 6 months into, I was blogging and then I'm getting censored because I can't talk about like going to this like gay bar to see trans people sing, or it's like it's just not for me. It's like I can't stomach it. So, and I'm also in my 40s. Like I don't think that I'm influencer age, in that social media kind of way. I think I can make a lot more difference just like doing bigger, longer term projects that will hopefully resonate and inspire other people to do whatever kind of activism they want to do.
So to that point, if someone came to you now, a younger person, and said, Afropunk came out when I was 13, I'd love to do another version of that addresses the Black experience in punk rock now. Would that be something you'd be like, sure, go for it, I'll help you in any way I can? Or is that something that you feel is your thing and you'd encourage them to go do something more of their own creation?
No, I mean, I think that like I've always encouraged people to tell their story, and I think that like the idea of like Afropunk 2, and it's the same story is kind of whack. But if somebody wants to make a movie, or like I've seen books about being a Black goth, or, like I told you about my friend's book, Black Card. I think that there are ways to do it in an original way. And yeah, I don't have any like proprietary kind of like ownership over the Black punk experience,
So it sounds like you've straddled a lot. You've reinvented yourself several times. Is there just more of the same? Like, do you feel like if we talk to you in 10 years from now, it'll be a whole different story?
Well, I think I'm saying the same thing that I've always said. I'm just saying it through different mediums. So yeah, I'll probably have a few more projects. I might not be tattooing. I might be doing something else. But I just looked at a zine that I wrote when I was 17. And even though the writing is terrible, I was saying the same thing that I'm saying now.
Yeah. You don't want to be remembered for that 1 7-inch, but whatever else you do put out, you want to be remembered for that over and over and over again. It's not the same thing. You're not holding on to the past.
The Stones still play Satisfaction every night, though. I mean, like, there's something to be said for that, don't you think?
Yes, but it's like, speaking of stiff, Gorilla Biscuits has a reunion tour every so often, and they like play everything off of Start Today and everyone loves it. That's fine. But like, I would love for them to make a new album that actually anybody cared about, I often think that like there's a time and a place and an energy, and no artist wants to think that they like expired in high school or whatever, but all we can do is try, right?
Do you believe to that point? I mean, there are definitely people that believe that, a band has a time and a place, and there's a limit to that creative bucket, how much is in there. Do you ever fear that that's true with what you're doing? I mean, do you feel like changing mediums and jumping from project to project kind of helps shield you from that? Or is it something that, as a creative person is always kind of in the back of your mind?
I definitely have had, I think I said this before, like I have had moments where I'm like, I don't want to just do these black punk stories. But I also I'm not so calculated that I'm like, oh, I've told it in film, now I'm going to tell it in comics, and next I'm going to tell it in some other medium. Like, I just do what is interesting to me, and then when it's not interesting anymore, I stop doing it and I do something else. And I'm just not married to a medium that way. And it's not to say I won't come back. Like, I'm totally interested in doing film again, but for 10 years, I didn't want anything to do with it.
Are there any crazy out there ideas that you've just been like, that's not me, as far as things you've considered and been like, I just can't do it?
You mean like I came up with an idea and I was like, no, I can't do that idea?
Yeah, like to Bill's earlier point, like, did you have a moment where you were like, I'm going to do Aliens 3, or I'd love to do a sci-fi movie, or I'd love to, do something that's completely different than anything that people would ever, I mean, you already have such a varied output, so that may be a harder question, but.
Yeah, I mean, it's like I wrote a sci-fi script like 10 years ago, and that was of interest to me. I like that stuff. I'm not really into like slapstick screwball comedies or whatever, but if something inspired me to like be into them, then yeah, I could totally see myself like put all my energy into just as far as like art is concerned. Like, I'm not really afraid of like visual stuff, and starting from the beginning and learning and being like, hey, I don't know anything about this, like, can you guys help me or whatever. I kind of know where my limitations are. Like, I'm not going to start a band or try to be a singer because like nobody wants to hear that, including me.
Yo, did we lose Charlie?
No, I'm here.
Okay.
I heard him eating chips before.
So who are your heroes? Yeah, who do you look up to?
So that's a hard one because I kind of come from that, like, kill rock stars, kind of like, not the band, but like, I'm not the label, but the idea of like, I don't know, who do I look up to currently? I mean, I'm really impressed with my friend Mo. He's in Afropunk, but he's currently president of the Working Families Party, and he's like on the ground, like doing hella shit. Like, he's just always been an organizer, and I really am impressed by him and inspired. I'm embarrassed to be like just super cheesy and say like I'm still impressed by Ian MacKaye and the things that he's accomplished.
Whatever happened to calling him Ian McKay?
I think that the narrative changed. I think the narrative changed.
No, if you ever call it to his face, which I have, he corrects you and makes you feel really stupid.
But then he makes you feel better and he goes, come over to the porch, let's take a photo.
Yeah. Exactly.
Have you ever talked to Ian?
Yeah, he actually invited me to the porch one time. He had seen Afropunk in probably like 2006 or something like that, and wrote me an email. And at the time I was working on a book that I needed a lot of photography for, and he was like, oh, I have such a huge archive, you should come over sometime. And I was like, I will be there tomorrow. And he was like so generous with his time. Like, we spent, I don't know, like 6 or 7 hours at the place, and he was just showing us like all these insane, I mean, it's just a thing of like being like a regular person. And I love that idea of somebody who is just like, yeah, I've accomplished all these things, but I'm also just a person, and I'm okay with like I know he doesn't feel comfortable with people standing in line to shake his hand at shows and stuff like that. It's like, are they afraid like that X will wear off on their hand or something? I think they're trying to get they're hoping some of it will rub off on them,
What did you write on your arm again?
Murphy's Law.
No.
Wrong arm, sorry.
Yeah, that day I wrote Fuck Your Vegan Power. At a 108 show, I wrote Worship Me. Like, just whatever's going to antagonize people.
Maybe that's the next thing. Maybe you could just write those things that come up to your mind on people's arms while they're in line.
Yeah, just, hey, teenager, come here.
And take a picture. I would buy that book. If you just took a picture of all of them and the face when they looked at it. I would pay $20 for that.
It's nothing but pen 15. I just write that over.
I think you should be more active on your social media presence and go out to punks with bad tattoos and offer to fix them. Like, doesn't Brian Baker from Minor Threat, Bad Religion, all those, doesn't he have a Coca-Cola tattoo?
They all do, I think.
Really? That's funny.
Yeah, I think they all have a Coca-Cola tattoo. Yeah, I mean...
What's with these beverage tattoos?
Don't you have an Arizona iced tea tattoo, Bill?
I do
We
not.
heard about a Snapple tattoo, didn't we?
I have a T-shirt. I
have a tropical fantasy tattoo, but that's only for birth control.
So wait. Yeah, so like it sounds like your customers are a lot of punks, a lot of vegans, a lot of African Americans looking for a better quality tattoo. You use the word normals in the cartoon, some of the cartoon panels I saw. Like, do you have extra anxiety with normals?
It depends. Like when it comes to tattoos, no, because I'm in charge. They listen to me, you know? I wouldn't say anxiety. I still have anger, you know? There's still a part of me that's like remembers the harassment of just being a kid walking down. I was harassed on the street up until the day I moved from New York. And it's just like, at that point, I was just a grown man with dreads and a beard. Like, what are they harassing me for? I feel like I was always a target from like 13 to 30. So there's definitely a piece of me that has like anger and recognizes that like years and years of people like on the subway going like, oh my God, look at his, you know, whatever. It's like, that really did something to my self-esteem, you know? So
that guy definitely does that to everyone.
as a kid, it was just a normal thing. Like, you know, I had piercings and I would like ride the subway and I had to like hide my face the whole ride to school so that I wouldn't get like harassed. And it was like, I would literally have to fight every day if I stepped to every stranger who said something random, something mean to me. So that just can't be good for somebody's self-esteem. So as an adult, I still have resentment towards whether it was like the typical 80s jocks versus the punks or just the New York kind of like, you guys are coming to the village to fuck with us. Like, why don't you just stay wherever you're from?
Yeah. I mean, is that the same guy, though, that's giving you the notes that are bullshit on your art?
Possibly. Who knows who these people grow up to be? Not people who are actually making art. So I was talking to my cousin the other day, who is just a very typical like brother from Bed-Stuy, and typical in like the way that he grew up and his appearance and whatnot. But he does have an artistic soul, and he's really like tried to cultivate that despite his like upbringing. And we were talking the other day, and he was like, yo, why you always like get in on those us normals? And he wasn't even really asking. Like he understood that like he also has a lot to learn. He's somebody who like, if he wasn't super dark skinned, if he wasn't 300 pounds, if he wasn't like grew up in Bed-Stuy, if he wasn't like raised all around drug dealers, like all of these things, if even one of those things was different, he would have a completely different life.
Is he still in Bed-Stuy?
He is. He's part-time because he works upstate. So
I just want to know if he's still all around the drug dealers or there's a bunch of like hipsters moved in.
He's still on the block. Like he lives on the block that there's like a lot of Bloods and stuff there. So it's still real, but I'm really proud of him. He really is like trying, like he's a really good photographer and trying to do his thing. But it's like, I've watched for years how it could be different, but he had to like start from so much further back. Like he was still like actively homophobic 10 years ago. And it was only through a series of experiences that he realized that that's not serving him or anyone he cares about. So it's just like that kind of stuff that we learned a lot earlier because of...
we played the 25th anniversary of Stonewall at ABC No Rio.
That's right.
Oh, that's rad.
Speaking of homophobic, Bill could tell you about his theatrics.
I don't remember any homophobic theatrics.
You don't remember those styrofoam bricks you made?
I did make styrofoam bricks.
That you soaked with water because it was like 110 degrees in that club that night?
Only like 2 people got the joke.
One of them was me.
I know.
Sounds like a lot of Bug Out Society shows.
It wasn't. I feel like we're being playful.
You come from a part of the scene that is like straddling the line of offensive and just hoping that people get it. And
yeah, but I get to tell my daughter all the time, we played the 25th anniversary of Stonewall.
That's right. They picked us to play that. They said, who are we going to get to play this anniversary? Bug Out Society, definitely.
Yeah, that's what I would have thought.
I would say, other than, not getting the joke, people did appreciate the wet bricks and that
Yes,
heat.
they did. That was certainly a pleasure. Even the spray back, when you threw it and it hit somebody in the head and the spray back on you was nice,
I think we could turn that around. Basically, Harley from the Cro-Mags there's posters of him up on Christopher Street because he used to throw bricks at homosexual couples. And it was called the Brick Game. And the only thing that was funny about it is the person who knew about it and told us about this was the least likely person to ever participate or anything like that. And we would just force him to tell this story that was completely offensive in every way. And we just thought it was funny just to embarrass him. But
I got really excited at first because I thought you were going to say that there was like a WWF style poster of Harley Flanagan somewhere that I could buy on eBay.
I think it's a screenshot from his new video.
I thought you were saying there were posters up on Christopher Street because he was the Grand Marshal of the Pride Parade.
you know what? I think that is a tattoo idea. And just be careful walking by Harley.
Yeah, then he comes and gets both of us.
Civil
Yeah, save it for Sid. Save it for Sid.
I think we got that to wrap.
That's it, kids. The gig is up. The cops are here, and your mom is calling jails, hospitals, and all your friends' houses, wondering where you've been. Tune in next week for another fascinating, mesmerizing, and absolutely unmissable episode. And be sure to get on the list and follow the boys on social media at Killed by Desk. This podcast is produced by Jesse Cannon. And if you enjoyed this conversation, there's tons more where this came from. For only $5 a month, you can get full episodes with each of our guests for a total of 5 episodes per month. Want to help us out with some gas money and to get us to the next show? We have merch and more at KilledByDesk.com.